At -20, the cold doesn't just kill you, it erases you.
The cold doesn't just kill you, it erases you. At -20 degrees, the air becomes a razor, slicing through hope until there's nothing left but the raw instinct to breathe. William Wynne felt the frame of the cabin shake as the door slammed, a final, violent punctuation to a life of service. Behind that door was warmth, whiskey, and the bitter face of Earl Dempsey. In front of him, only the white void of a Montana blizzard. "Get off my land, Brooks. I don't want no ticking time bombs under my roof." Earl's scream was still ringing in William's ears, sharper than the wind. Beside him, Smoky, a 30-kilogram engine of muscle and loyalty, pressed against William's thigh. The German shepherd's breath puffed in desperate white clouds, his moss-green eyes reflecting a storm that looked exactly like the ones William saw when he closed his eyes at night. William didn't beg. Special ops don't beg. He adjusted the straps of his meager pack, his fingers already losing feeling. He looked at the yellow porch light, a fading star in a dying universe. And then he turned his back on it. "We move, Smoky," William rasped, the ice already forming in his box beard. Forward is the only way out. They weren't just walking into a storm. They were walking into a ghost story. The town of Red Valley had shutters closed tight, not just against the frost, but against a man who reminded them too much of the wars they wanted to forget. But as the snow buried his tracks, William remembered a tactical map he'd seen years ago, a graveyard of steel at the edge of the valley, a place where the world threw away things that were broken, just like him. The rail yard looked like a battlefield after the artillery had gone silent. Massive steel skeletons lay buried under white mounds, their tracks twisted like broken promises. William's lungs burned. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. Smoky barked, a sharp, tactical alert. He was nose down in a drift, leading William away from the main line toward a forgotten siding. And there she was, a single, rusted boxcar, tilted like a sinking ship. Its red paint had been sandblasted by decades of storms, but the structure was solid. This wasn't just a rail car. To William, it was an LZ, a safe house. The door was fused shut by a wall of ice. William braced his broad shoulders against the iron, his muscular frame straining until the tendons in his neck threatened to snap. "Heave!" he grunted, a command from a past life. With a scream of tortured metal, the door groaned open just enough. Inside, the air was still, quiet. The smell of old timber and cold grease greeted them. As William flicked his lighter, the small flame revealed a cavern of shadows. But in the corner, something caught the light, a dented tin box. William pried it open to find a letter, yellowed by time. 1967, this car saved my life. Let it save yours. William looked at Smoky, who was already sniffing the floor. For the first time in years, the veteran didn't feel like a drifter. He felt like a commander. "We're not just sleeping here, Smoky," he whispered. "We're digging in." Day 2. The storm hadn't broken, but William had. Not his spirit, but his body. Every joint ached with the memory of frozen trenches. But a soldier doesn't have the luxury of pain. He spent the morning winterizing the fortress, using the burlap sack Smoky found. William stuffed every crack in the siding. He used a piece of discarded metal to create a heat reflector for their small fire. It was a masterpiece of scrapyard engineering. But survival has a price. $12. That was the unauthorized occupancy fee Caleb Morgan, the rail inspector, had demanded when he found them. Caleb didn't see a hero. He saw a squatter. 48 hours, Wynne, or I call the sheriff. Caleb had barked, staying well away from Smoky's low, predatory growl. William looked at his coin pouch. $2.74. He needed work in a town that hated him. He and Smoky headed into Red Valley under a bruised yellow sky. He chopped wood for a widow who didn't look him in the eye. He shoveled driveways for men who whispered unstable as he passed. By dusk, his hands were bleeding into his gloves. But the fever in Smoky's eyes was what worried him more than the money. The dog was shivering, not from the cold, but from something deeper, a sickness born of the storm. William held him close in the middle of the street, the world turning its back on them once again. "Hold on, partner," he whispered. "The mission isn't over yet." The third night didn't just bring the cold. It brought ghosts. Inside the iron walls of the railcar, the temperature stayed just above freezing, but Smoky's body was a furnace. The German shepherd lay motionless on the raised pallet William had built, his rhythmic wheezing echoing like the sound of distant rotors. William knelt by his side, pressing a damp cloth, torn from his last clean shirt, to the dog's forehead. Smoky's moss-green eyes were glassy, unfocused. This wasn't just a cold. It was pneumonia. Suddenly, a massive gust slammed into the rail car, shaking the 30-ton steel box on its rusted springs. The sound triggered at the snap. William wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in the Hindu Kush, under a rain of mortar fire. The crackling of the fire became the rattle of AK-47s. His pulse hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Get down! Cover!" he barked at the empty shadows, his square jaw tightening until it locked. He reached for a rifle that wasn't there, his muscular frame trembling in the dim orange light. The PTSD was clawing at his throat, a shadow more dangerous than the blizzard. Then a weak, hot weight pressed against his hand. Smoky had dragged himself across the pallet. With the last of his strength, the dog let out a faint, dry whine and rested his chin on William's scarred knuckles. The contact was like an electric shock of reality. "I'm here, Smoky," William whispered, his voice cracking as he pulled the dog into his broad chest. "I'm here. We're both here." Outside, the sky turned a sickly, bruised purple. The pressure was dropping. The superstorm the town had whispered about was no longer a threat. It was a reality. And as the first wave of the wall of white hit the rail yard, William knew their fortress was about to become the only life raft in a drowning world. The storm hit like a physical weight, burying the rail car in minutes. It was silent, the terrifying silence of being entombed in ice. William sat in the dark, feeding the fire with the last of his salvaged wood, listening to Smoky's ragged breathing. Then the sound came. Not the wind, not the groaning steel. A frantic, rhythmic thumping. Someone was hitting the iron door. William grabbed his heavy flashlight and slid the bolt. As the door creaked open an inch, a cascade of snow poured in, followed by a human shape. It was Caleb Morgan, the inspector who had tried to evict him. He wasn't alone. Behind him, huddled in the white void, were a dozen people. The Harrys, the Thompsons, even old Mrs. Carter. Their homes had been crushed by the weight of the snow or ripped apart by the wind. They were blue, trembling and dying. Caleb looked at William, his eyes wide with shame that cut deeper than the frost. Our houses, they're gone, Wynne. The whole block. We have nowhere. William looked at the faces, the same people who had whispered about him, who had closed their doors when he was freezing. He looked at Smoky, who had lifted his head, his canine instinct still sharp despite the fever. The air in the railcar was the only warm for miles. It was his haven, his fortress. And these were the people who had tried to tear it down. Wynne, Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. Please, my daughter. William's jaw tightened. He thought of the desert. He thought of the oath he took. A soldier doesn't leave anyone behind, even the ones who don't deserve to be saved. Get inside, William rasped, stepping back and swinging the door wide. Everyone, now! The rail car, once a lonely tomb, was now a buzzing hive of survival. 14 souls huddled together, their shared body heat doing more to fight the cold than the small fire ever could. William moved among them like a ghost of the battlefield. He rationed the water. He taught them how to huddle to preserve core temperature. He was a commander they never knew they needed, but his heart was on that pallet. Smoky's condition was deteriorating. The dog's breath was a wet, heavy rattle now. He was fading. He saved my son, Mrs. Thompson whispered, watching William tend to the dog. During the worst of the move, Smoky had used his own body to shield her boy from a falling ice sheet. One by one, the townspeople started to move. Caleb Morgan took off his expensive wool coat and laid it over Smoky. Mrs. Carter opened her bag and found a small bottle of herbal tea she'd saved. Even the children brought their scarves, layering them over the dog who had become their guardian. William watched them, the people who had once treated him like a monster, now tending to his partner with tears in their eyes. The storm roared outside, a monster trying to crush the steel walls, but inside, a different kind of fire was burning. It was the warmth of community being reborn in the dark. As dawn approached, the wind finally began to lose its edge. William sat by Smoky, his hand resting on the dog's chest. For the first time in hours, the rattle was gone. The breathing was deep, steady. Smoky opened his moss-green eyes, looked at William, and let out a single soft thump of his tail. He had made it. They had all made it. The morning after the superstorm didn't just bring sunlight, it brought a reckoning. Red Valley was buried, a ghost town of white mounds and shattered timber. But as the townspeople emerged from the rusted iron womb of the rail car, they didn't see a trash heap anymore. They saw a sanctuary. William Wynne stood on the rusted edge of the car, his moss-green eyes scanning the horizon. He was exhausted, his muscular frame finally showing the weight of the vigil, but he stood like a sentinel. Smoky was beside him, his strength returning with every steady breath, his black and tan coat ruffled by the crisp morning air. Caleb Morgan was the last to step out. He held the bundle of paperwork he'd carried through the blizzard, the very documents meant to seal the rail car's fate. He looked at the squatter who had saved his family, then at the frozen wasteland that used to be his pride, the railroad. They officially abandoned this siding in '78 when, Caleb said, his voice thick with a newfound respect. The files were buried, lost in the sea of bureaucracy, but I found them. This land doesn't belong to the company. It doesn't belong to the state. Caleb handed the papers to William. By every right of survival and service, it belongs to you. I'm filing the adverse possession claim myself. This isn't just a rail car anymore. It's your home, legally and forever. William took the papers, his rough, scarred fingers tracing the official stamps. He looked back at the interior of the car, the makeshift beds, the small fire pit, the walls that held against the fury of God. He didn't see a cage. He saw a legacy. Months passed. The white tomb of winter melted into the vibrant green of a Montana spring. But Red Valley didn't go back to the way it was. The storm had washed away the old prejudices, leaving behind something stronger. The rail yard was no longer a place of scrap. It was a construction site, led by Caleb Morgan and the families who had survived that night. The town came together to help William Wynne. They didn't just repair the rail car, they transformed it. They built a wide wooden porch around the iron frame. They installed proper windows, a solar power array, and a wood-burning stove that didn't leak smoke. Above the door, a hand-carved sign was raised that would polish and proud, Honor Haven. It became more than a house. It became a community center for veterans passing through, a sanctuary for those the world had forgotten. William sat on his new porch, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. He still had the nightmares sometimes. The ghosts of the desert still visited. But now, he had a home to wake up to. Smoky sat at his feet, his muzzle graying, his ears twitching at the sound of children playing in the nearby field. The dog wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a legend. The story of the veteran and his dog, who built a haven inside a forgotten rail car, spread far beyond the valley. It became a reminder that even when the world throws you out into the minus 20-degree dark, you can still build a fire. You can still hold the line. And you can still find your way home. Soft, emotional piano music builds. They say that in the heart of the coldest winter, we find within us an invincible summer. William Wynne didn't just survive minus 20 degrees. He didn't just survive the abandonment of his town or the fever of his best friend. He proved that a soldier's duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It ends when the last person is safe, when the last bridge is built, when the forgotten are remembered. If you ever find yourself lost in the storm, look for the red rail car at the edge of Red Valley. Look for the man with the moss-green eyes and the dog with the heart of a lion. They'll have a fire waiting for you. Because in Honor Haven, no one is ever truly alone. Thank you for standing with us through the storm. If Smoky and William's journey moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to join our unit, and leave a 1 in the comments to honor our veterans. Until next time, hold the line. Tense, low-frequency background music. Transformation never comes without friction. While most of Red Valley saw a hero in the rusted shadow of the rail car, Earl Dempsey saw a threat to his twisted sense of order. To Earl, the fact that William had saved the town was an insult, a mirror reflecting his own cowardice on that frozen night. Earl stood at the edge of the rail yard, his face flushed with a mixture of whiskey and spite. He watched his trucks loaded with donated timber from the lumberyard pulled up to Honor Haven. He saw Caleb Morgan, The man who was supposed to enforce the law, now wearing a tool belt, helping William reinforce the porch. You think a coat of paint changes what you are, Brooks? Earl spat, his voice carrying over the sound of saws. You're a drifter with a dangerous animal. This town has a short memory, but I don't. William didn't stop hammering. His muscular arms, corded with tension, drove a nail deep into the cedar plank with a single, rhythmic strike. Beside him, Smoky stood up, his black and tan coat bristling. The dog didn't growl, he simply stared. His moss-green eyes locked onto Earl with a predatory stillness that made the older man take an involuntary step back. The storm is over, Earl, William said, finally looking up. His moss-green eyes were calm, but they held the cold weight of a man who had stared down much worse than a bitter rancher. You should head home before the sun sets. It wasn't a threat. It was a tactical observation. But to Earl, it was a declaration of war. He turned and stomped away. But the look in his eyes promised that the peace of Honor Haven was a fragile thing, and he intended to shatter it. The attack didn't come in the light. Cowards always prefer the shadows. It was 3 a.m. when Smoky's low, vibrating growl pulled William out of a dreamless sleep. The veteran was on his feet before his eyes were even open, an old reflex from the mountains of Tora. Bora. He didn't turn on the light. He reached for his flashlight, but kept it off, moving through the railcar like a shadow. Outside, the smell hit him first. Not the crisp scent of pine, but the chemical sting of accelerant. Gasoline. William slid the door open silently. In the moonlight, he saw a figure dousing the newly built porch in liquid. The figure held a lighter, the small flame dancing in the wind, ready to turn Honor Haven into a funeral pyre. Smoky, hold, William whispered. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He moved with the predatory grace of a hunter. 2 steps, then a lunging strike. William's hand clamped around the intruder's wrist like an iron vice. The lighter fell into the grass, extinguished. The intruder gasped, struggling against William's muscular grip. As the moonlight hit the man's face, William didn't see Earl Dempsey. He saw one of Earl's hired hands, a young man named Tommy, trembling with terror. He told me you were a freak, Brooks. He said you were going to hurt the town. Tommy whimpered. William looked at the gasoline on his porch, then at the terrified boy. He could have broken the kid's arm. He could have let Smoky loose. But William Wynne had seen enough fire to last a lifetime. Go, William said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Tell Earl he's running out of chances. And tell him the next time he sends a boy to do a man's job, I won't be this patient. The attempt to burn down the railcar backfired, not with fire, but with truth. Word of Earl's sabotage spread through Red Valley like a different kind of blaze. By the time the town council met the following Tuesday, the atmosphere was electric. The meeting hall was packed. Earl Dempsey sat in the front row, his arms crossed, his face a mask of feigned innocence. William Wynne sat at the back, Smoky lying quietly at his feet. William didn't wear a suit. He wore his work flannel, his military posture making him stand out amongst the townspeople. Caleb Morgan stood up first. We've heard the rumors. We've seen the damage. But more importantly, we've seen the man who saved our families when the world was freezing over. Caleb produced a ledger the official town records. Earl Dempsey claims William Wynne is a vagrant. I claim he is the soul of this community. I move that Honor Haven be granted permanent status as a historical landmark and a private residence for Mr. Wynne, tax-exempt for 10 years in recognition of his service. The hall erupted. Earl jumped his feet, screaming about property values and unstable veterans. But his voice was drowned out by the applause of the Thompsons, the Harrys, and Mrs. Carter. When the vote was called, it wasn't even close. William stood up as the motion passed. He didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded to Caleb, then looked at Earl. The rancher's face was purple with rage, but he was powerless. The town had chosen its hero. As William walked out of the hall, the townspeople stepped aside, making a path of respect. Smoky trotted beside him, his head held high. They were no longer outcasts. They were the foundation. The victory at the town hall was a legal one, but the real war for William Wynne was fought in the silence of the railcar at night. Now that the immediate threat of survival had passed, the quiet became a vacuum filled by memories he had spent decades trying to outrun. William sat by the window, the blue light of the Montana moon illuminating the deep forehead wrinkles and the moss-green eyes that had seen too much. In his hand was a small, brass shell casing, a relic from a rooftop in Kandahar. Smoky sensed it first. The dog's ears flicked, his aggressive posture softening into an empathetic stillness. He moved toward William, resting his heavy black and tan head on the veteran's knee. Smoky didn't need a command. He was a K-9 operative, and his mission now was to anchor his partner to the present. "I can still hear the wind over the radio." "Smoky," William whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Sometimes I don't know if I'm here or back there, waiting for flares to go up." The PTSD was a ghost that didn't respond to reason. It responded to touch, to the rhythmic thump of a loyal dog's tail against the wooden floor. Every time the world started to blur into a haze of desert dust and gunfire, the warmth of Smoky's fur brought William back. He realized then that Honor Haven wasn't just a building with a new porch. It was a recovery zone. And for the first time, William understood that to truly save the town, he first had to finish saving himself. The victory at the town hall was a legal one, but the real war for William Wynne was fought in the silence of the railcar at night. Now that the immediate threat of survival had passed, the quiet became a vacuum filled by memories he had spent decades trying to outrun. William sat by the window, the blue light of the Montana moon illuminating the deep forehead wrinkles and the moss-green eyes that had seen too much. In his hand was a small, brass shell casing, a relic from a rooftop in Kandahar. Smoky sensed it first. The dog's ears flicked, his aggressive posture softening into an empathetic stillness. He moved toward William, resting his heavy, black and tan head on the veteran's knee. Smoky didn't need a command. He was a K-9 operative, and his mission now was to anchor his partner to the present. "I can still hear the wind over the radio." "Smoky," William whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Sometimes I don't know if I'm here or back there, waiting for flares to go up." The PTSD was a ghost that didn't respond to reason. It responded to touch, to the rhythmic thump of a loyal dog's tail against the wooden floor. Every time the world started to blur into a haze of desert dust and gunfire, the warmth of Smoky's fur brought William back. He realized then that Honor Haven wasn't just a building with a new porch. It was a recovery zone. And for the first time, William understood that to truly save the town, he first had to finish saving himself. While William Wynne was building a community of hope, Earl Dempsey was drowning in his own bitterness. The more the town respected William, the more Earl's power in Red Valley evaporated. His ranch was failing, his hired hands were leaving, and his reputation was in tatters. Driven by a toxic cocktail of whiskey and desperation, Earl decided on one final reckless gambit. He didn't go after the railcar this time. He went after the foundation of William's soul, Smoky. It happened during the weekly supply run to town. William was inside the Sinclair gas station when he heard the screech of tires and Smoky's sharp, aggressive bark from the back of the pickup truck. William bolted out the door just in time to see Earl's black SUV swerving dangerously close to his truck. A passenger leaning out with a tranquilizer rifle, the kind used for unruly cattle. They weren't trying to kill Smoky. They were trying to abduct him, to leave William truly alone and broken. "Earl, stop," William roared, his muscular frame moving with a speed that defied his age. But Earl only laughed, a wild, hollow sound, as he gunned the engine. Smoky lunged at the SUV, his powerful German Shepherd instincts taking over. But the vehicle was too fast. A dart hissed through the air, catching Smoky in the flank. William's world went red. This wasn't just a provocation anymore. This was a tactical strike against his family. As Earl sped away toward the back roads of the valley, William didn't panic. He accessed the cold, lethal part of his brain, the part that knew how to track, how to hunt, and how to neutralize a threat. The old William Wynne was gone. The special ops commander was back. Earl Dempsey made the fatal mistake of thinking he was hunting a broken man. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a ghost with 30 years of tactical experience. William Wynne didn't chase the SUV blindly. He knew these back roads. He knew the terrain. He pulled the pickup into a skidding turn, his muscular hands moving with surgical precision on the steering wheel. Beside him, Smoky was fighting the effects of the tranquilizer, his head swaying, his moss-green eyes struggling to stay open. "Stay with me, Smoky. Focus," William commanded, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth it usually held. He tracked the dust cloud swirling over the pine trees, calculating the SUV's trajectory. Earl was headed for the old sawmill, a maze of rusted machinery and collapsing timber. It was a perfect place for an ambush or a grave. William reached into the back of his seat, pulling out a tactical vest he'd kept hidden since his return. He didn't need a rifle to neutralize a threat like Earl. He needed his mind. He killed the lights of the truck a mile out, gliding through the shadows of the forest like a panther. The special ops commander was back in his element. The forest wasn't a scenic landscape anymore. It was a theater of operations. Every snap of a twig, every shift in the wind was data. Earl Dempsey wasn't just losing his grip on the town. He was about to lose everything. Inside the sawmill, the air smelled of wet sawdust and Earl Dempsey's cheap whiskey. Earl stood by his SUV, holding a heavy iron crowbar, his face twisted in a manic grin. He had Smoky cornered in an old wooden crate, the dog still groggy but snarling with a primal ferocity. "You see, dog? Without your master, you're just a target," Earl sneered. raising the crowbar. He didn't hear the footsteps. He didn't hear the breath. "Put it down, Earl." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Earl spun around, swinging the crowbar blindly into the dark. William Wynne stepped into a patch of moonlight, his posture perfectly balanced, his moss-green eyes devoid of any mercy. "You're crazy, Brooks. You're a sick man." Earl screamed, charging forward. William didn't flinch. He parried the strike with the efficiency of a man who had fought in tunnels and alleyways across the world. A quick jab to the solar plexus, a sweep of the leg, and Earl was on the ground, the crowbar clattering away. William didn't strike again. He knelt over Earl, his scarred hand gripping the rancher's collar. Smoky, sensing the tide had turned, pushed his way out of the crate, his powerful black and tan frame casting a long shadow over the defeated man. "This isn't about the town, Earl," William whispered, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "This is about you thinking you could touch my dog and walk away. You're finished. Not just here. Everywhere." The sirens weren't for William. They were for Earl. Caleb Morgan and the local sheriff arrived 10 minutes later. Guided by the GPS coordinates William had sent silently from his truck, they found Earl Dempsey trembling on the floor of the sawmill, babbling about special ops ghosts and killer dogs, illegal abduction of a service animal, attempted arson and reckless endangerment. The sheriff recited as the cuffs clicked shut around Earl's wrists. Earl looked toward William, pleading for a moment, but the veteran was already walking toward the truck, his hand resting firmly on Smoky's head. "Is the dog okay?" Caleb asked, stepping over the debris. William paused, looking at Smoky. The German shepherd nuzzled his hand, his black and tan coat dusty, but his eyes clear. "He's better than okay, Caleb. He's a soldier. He's home." As the police cars drove away, taking the last of Red Valley's old, bitter guard with them, a profound silence settled over the sawmill. The threat was gone. The sabotage was over. William Wynne had defended his haven, not with the violence he had learned at war, but with the justice he had found in peace. He climbed back into his truck, the engine purring softly. He looked at the empty seat beside him, then at the Honor Haven keychain on his ignition. The war was finally, truly over, with Earl Dempsey behind bars. A strange and beautiful silence descended upon the rail yard, but the silence didn't stay empty for long. The Honor Haven sign had become a lighthouse, and the ships were starting to come in from fog. In the weeks following the sawmill confrontation, 3 more veterans arrived. They were like the first stranger, quiet, carrying the invisible weight of 1,000 combat hours, eyes scanning for exits even in the middle of a forest. William didn't just give them a place to sleep. He gave them a mission. "The Railcar is a heart, but we need more rooms," William said, standing before the 3 men. His muscular frame and square jaw commanded immediate respect, not because of his rank, but because he was a man who had built a life out of rusted scrap. He paired each man with a task. One, a former engineer, began designing small, modular cabins that could be built from local pine. Another, a medic, started a vegetable garden near the tracks, using the rich, thawed earth. Smoky was the soul of the operation. He moved from man to man, leaning against their legs when he sensed a spike in anxiety. his black and tan presence a living reminder that loyalty still existed in a broken world. William watched them work from the porch of the railcar. He realized he wasn't just a veteran anymore. He was a sergeant of a new kind of squad, one dedicated to life, not war. Growth brings attention, and not all of it was from the veterans. One afternoon, a sleek, black luxury vehicle pulled up to the rail yard. William stood his ground, his hand automatically dropping to Smoky's collar. Out stepped a woman in her late 60s, elegant but with eyes that held a sharp, iron-willed intelligence. It was Elena Dempsey, Earl's sister, the one who actually owned the majority of the Dempsey land and the family fortune. William braced for a lawsuit for more bitterness, but Elena didn't look like her brother. She looked at the rail car, at the garden, and at the men working with a quiet, reverent silence. "My brother is a fool, Mr. Wynne," she said, her voice like cold silk. "He never understood that power isn't about what you take. It's about what you build when everyone else is tearing things down." She handed William a legal envelope. Inside was a deed of gift, not just for the railcar siding, but for the 50 acres of forest and meadows surrounding it. "I'm liquidating the ranch. Earl will never see a cent of it," she continued. "Use this land. Build more than just cabins. Build a future for these men. It's the least the Dempsey name can do to settle the debt my brother owes you." William was stunned. He looked at the deed, then at Elena. He didn't know what to say, but Smoky did. The dog walked over to Elena and nudged her hand. She smiled, a rare, genuine thing, and patted the dog's head. The war with the Dempseys was truly over, replaced by an alliance that would change the valley forever. With 50 acres of freedom and the town's full support, Honor Haven transformed from a survival camp into a thriving village. Summer arrived in full force. The Montana heat a stark contrast to the winter that had nearly claimed them. The first harvest from the garden was a day of celebration. Baskets of tomatoes, peppers, and corn sat on the railcar's porch. The townspeople of Red Valley, the same ones who had once feared William, now came to buy produce, their money going directly into fund for new cabins. Mrs. Carter, the elderly woman from the storm, brought a fresh apple pie. The Thompson boy, now a frequent visitor, helped Smoky guard the vegetable stands. The rail yard was no longer a place of rusted memories. It was a place of vibrant, messy, beautiful life. William stood in the center of it all, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his muscular arms tanned by the sun. He looked at the 3 completed cabins, each a testament to a veteran's skill and recovery. But as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows over the tracks, William felt a familiar tug in his chest. It was a feeling a soldier gets when a mission is finally accomplished. He looked at Smoky, who was lying in the shade of the porch, eyes watching the sunset. "We did it, Smoky," William whispered. "We built the haven." However, even in the height of summer, William knew that a commander's job was never truly finished. There were still thousands of Smokies and Williams out there, lost in their own blizzards. And Honor Haven was only just beginning to grow its wings. Time, unlike the blizzard, is an enemy you cannot outrun or out-tactical. As autumn painted the Montana hills in shades of rust and gold, William noticed a change in the one soul who had never faltered. Smoky was slowing down, the 30 kilograms powerhouse of a German shepherd, once capable of lunging through deep snow and pinning intruders, now struggled to climb the porch steps. The pneumonia from the superstorm had left scars on his lungs that even the summer sun couldn't heal. William Wynne sat on the porch, his muscular hand stroking the thick black and tan fur. He saw the gray spreading across Smoky's muzzle, the way the dog's moss-green eyes would sometimes drift toward the horizon as if listening to a distant frequency. "You've done enough, partner," William whispered, his voice thick with emotion he rarely showed. "You held the line when I couldn't." The veterans of Honor Haven noticed too. They began to take turns staying with Smoky, bringing him the best cuts of meat and softest blankets. It was a silent tribute to the K-9 operative who had anchored their commander. William realized that Smoky wasn't just his dog anymore. He was the living heart of the community. And as the first frost of the new season touched the rails, William knew he had to prepare for a different kind of survival, the kind that continues even after a partner is gone. But fate wasn't done testing the fortress. A late autumn forest fire, sparked by a lightning strike miles away, began to roar toward the valley, fueled by dry winds. The authorities called for an evacuation. The younger veterans panicked, the smell of smoke triggering memories of burn pits and urban combat. William Wynne stood in the center of the yard, his voice cutting through the chaos like a gunshot. "Listen up. We are not running." William roared, his muscular frame poised and ready. "We have the clearing. We have the railcar. And we have each other. This is why we built this place." He organized a fire line, using the veteran skills to create a break in the trees. But in the middle of the operation, the Thompson boy, who had been helping clear brush, got trapped in a pocket of thick smoke near the old siding. William started to run, but a surge of heat blocked his path. Suddenly, a blur of black and tin shot past him. It was Smoky, despite his failing lungs, despite the gray in his muzzle. The old K-9 operative found a reserve of strength that defied biology. He vanished into the smoke, his barks guiding the boy towards safety. When they emerged, the boy was coughing but alive, clinging to Smoky's collar. The fire line held. The rail car survived. But as the smoke cleared, Smoky collapsed onto gravel, his chest heaving. He had given his final ounce of energy for the community he helped create. William knelt beside him. The heat from the dying fire, nothing compared to the warmth of the bond they shared. Smoky survived the fire, but he never truly stood up again. He spent his final days on the porch of the railcar, surrounded by the men whose lives he had saved and the town he had united. One evening, under a sky so clear it looked like a map of the universe, Smoky let out a long, contented sigh and closed his eyes for the last time. William Wynne didn't scream. He didn't break. He simply sat there for hours, holding his partner's paw. The silence of the rail yard, now filled with the heavy weight of a life well lived. They buried him on a hill overlooking the tracks, beneath an ancient pine tree. But the story didn't end there. A month later, Caleb Morgan arrived at the railcar with a crate. Inside was a black and tan German shepherd puppy, a descendant of a K-9 line from the same training. Facilities Smoky had once called home. "He needs a commander, William," Caleb said softly. William Wynne looked at the puppy, then at the veterans who were now building a library and a workshop. Honor Haven was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a machine of hope, running on the fuel Smoky had provided. William reached down and picked up the puppy. The dog licked his scarred jawline, and for the first time since the superstorm, William Wynne felt the full circle of life close. Smoky was gone, but his spirit was woven into every plank of the railcar, every vegetable in the garden, and every heartbeat of the men who had finally found their way home. 10 years have passed since the night the superstorm tried to erase William Wynne from a map of the living. Today, the rail yard is no longer a graveyard of rusted steel. It is a living, breathing monument known across the country as the Fortress of Second Chances. Honor Haven has grown into a village of 24 cabins, a greenhouse, and a workshop where veterans teach each other the crafts of peace. But at the center of it all remains a red rail car, polished, reinforced, and still standing on the same siding where a man and his dog once fought for their lives at minus 20 degrees. William Wynne is 60 now. His salt and pepper hair has turned to a distinguished silver, and the wrinkles on his forehead are no longer carved by fear, but by the weight of 1,000 stories he has helped rewrite. He still walks with the straight-back discipline of a commander, but his moss-green eyes have found a peace that the desert could never provide. Beside him, the new Smoky, now a powerful, full-grown guardian, patrols the perimeter with the same fierce loyalty as his predecessor. They are the sentinels of the valley, the living proof that no one is truly broken beyond repair. Every year, on the anniversary of the blizzard, the townspeople of Red Valley gather at the tracks. They don't come to mourn. They come to remember that when the world grew cold and the doors were shut, one man chose to open his. They remember that a veteran's greatest victory wasn't won on a distant battlefield, but in a rusted boxcar through the simple, radical act of refusing to give up on humanity. As the sun sets over the Montana peaks, casting a golden mantle over Honor Haven, William rests his hand on the iron door of the railcar. He looks up at the stars, then down at his dog. The mission is complete. The haven is built. And the legend of the veteran and the dog who conquered the winter. The channel The Dog and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.